Lord willing. Okay. Can we defend the statement that Jerusalem is the center of the universe? Could you defend that statement by saying what? What has happened at Jerusalem, Donna, that makes it the center of the universe, of all creation? His birth was 3 miles away. His death on the cross, his ministry, the teachings, and then the resurrection from the dead. All of it as the foundation of our faith. Without any of those points, we would be of all men most deprived. Jerusalem is in the center of Israel. Sorry about that. Not encounter these things. I can't get the screen to change. We'll try it this way. There we go. See the ridge in the center of the country? That is a mountain ridge. Goes running all the way towards the top of the screen, which is Sea of Galilee. The ridge is 2,200 feet above sea level. The Dead Sea is 1,500 feet below sea level. That's a huge drop coming from where you see the desert encroaching to the left, to the west, right to the top of the ridge. Now, the ridge is the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. It is just over the ridge where the Garden of Gethsemane is. It is where the city of Bethany or the village of Bethany is, right on the tip top of the ridge, looking down to the Dead Sea. Now, you're looking literally, if you're standing on that ridge, across the Kidron Valley, up to the Mount of Olives, to the top of it, we're going to see it in a second, you can see 20 miles all the way downhill to the Dead Sea. It is stark, desert, desolate. And yet, that's where the road to Jericho goes. And that's where the Good Samaritan ministered to the person who had been robbed in this desert region. So you can see that we've got a ridge in the center of the country. Jerusalem is right crowned by the mountains all around that ridge. So we're going to see that in just a second. Here is modern day Jerusalem, but I want you to look at where that red outline is. That is Mount Zion, okay? We hear of Mount Zion being throughout Scripture, and it represents the original city of Jebus or Jerusalem. That is where the original archaeological beginnings of the city under the Jebusites was. It's what David captured to become the city of David. It's where David built his palace. It's where royalty lived on the hilltop there around him. It's a fortified region. And the rest of the city that you see there was not there at all. It was just fields. Now, there is something that predates David's city and the Jebusite city. See the Dome of the Rock there? It's not the Dome of the Rock, the gold thing on the what's called the Temple Mount. It's what the Temple Mount is. It's called Mount Moriah. Anybody know what happened on Mount Moriah? Biblical. That's right. It's where Abraham is thought to have sacrificed or at least offered Isaac. Right there in the exact same place where another event happened in David's time. Anybody know the story of Araunah? The threshing floor of Araunah. David did something that displeased the Lord greatly. And it wasn't the Bathsheba thing. It was numbering the people. This thing displeased the Lord. And Nathan the prophet was sent to David and said, David, multiple choice question. Which would you rather have? 3 years of famine, 3 months of running from your enemies, or 3 days of pestilence? And which one did David choose? He chose the short route. He said, I'd rather fall into the hands of the Lord for 3 days than run from my enemies for 3 months or have a famine for 3 years. So he took the short route. Well, that wasn't so good for about 60,000 Israelites who were killed by the sword of the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord came down and he went throughout Israel killing people. And then he got to the threshing floor of Araunah. He was about to wipe out thousands in Jerusalem in David's time. When David saw the angel of the Lord up here on Mount Moriah, and he went and bowed before him and said, my Lord, let your wrath be on me and my family. We're the ones at fault. And instead, the Lord halted right there. Sword of the Lord. Come on in. Suzanne, right? Okay, that's fine. When David saw the angel of the Lord stop with that sword in his hand and stand there, he prostrated himself before him. And the Lord had mercy and stopped the plague at that point right there. And it was at that point that David said to this poor Jebusite farmer who was threshing his wheat, who was trembling in his boots because he saw the angel of the Lord as well. David said, give me your property and sell it to me for full price, because this is where I will build a house for the Lord. And it was out of that story that we get the location and the history of what took place to select this. Of course, David was later told, you're not the one to build me a house, but your son is. And so David saved up everything, and it was through his efforts that Solomon was able to take the material and build the temple there on the Temple Mount. But down here below, we're going to look at it, we're going to go back in time. Let's just look at what it looks like today. We're going to be walking down into the city of David, starting from right near the top, going past where his palace was, right up here, descending down into the underground. And you're going to see all kinds of amazing things down there as we descend into the Gihon Spring. Here's the Gihon Spring. See this tower right here? The Palace of David up here on the top. Retaining walls, walled city. This is not a big place. I mean, all things by being in scale, it is not a huge place. But this is what it looked like in Solomon's time. Okay, our hotel is right on the other side of that ridge, right on the other side. That's where we're going to be staying. And you can walk down to the Temple Mount, to the Wailing Wall, or you can walk down to the city of David. It's 3/4 of a mile or so. So that's the scale. Now, I want to point out something, and let's get rid of this tab here. Do you see the water coming out the bottom of these exit irrigation holes in the side of the mountain. How is that? How do you get water to, I mean, it's like drilling a hole and a faucet opening up and filling up all of the terraces and everything for farmers going down below. It's because of the Gihon Spring. See that tower on the right here? This tower is an artesian well. It's coming from 100 miles away and bubbling up in this area of Jerusalem. It's the main water source of Jerusalem historically. So archaeologically, they have discovered that during the Canaanite time period, we're talking 100 years before this picture. This is Solomon, but 100 years before, just before David, there was a tower down there that hid the spring so that the enemies of Jerusalem couldn't have access to water. But during the Canaanite times, they went ahead and drilled holes and made a tunnel, irrigation tunnel underground to bring that spring out and have it water through these holes. Now, when we get to Jerusalem and we go down into the city of David, you're going to be given three choices. You can do one of three things, and you'll have it explained to you here shortly. This is what it looked like the first time it's mentioned in the Bible, and it predates, it is the time of Abraham. Can you think of another story, and it's the first story mentioned in the Bible of Jerusalem? It involved Abraham, his nephew Lot. They divided the land. Lot chose Sodom and Gomorrah in the Fertile Valley down by the Jordan River. And because he did, he became a target along with three other kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, of five kings who lived at the top of the valley. And they came down and they captured Lot and his family, and they hauled them off into captivity, heading way past the Sea of Galilee. Abraham did something. What did he do? He chased after him. And was he successful? In fact, he recovered all of the people, all of the loot that they took from Sodom and Gomorrah and the other king, and the kings, and brought them all back. And when he came through Jerusalem, who met him? Melchizedek. Remember the name Melchizedek? Melchizedek was a priest of Yahweh Most High, God Most High. Melchizedek is the king of Jabus or Salem. He's the king of Jerusalem. So this is the first mention of Jerusalem in the Bible. And it was through Abraham coming and paying a tithe to Melchizedek, if you remember the story. And so Melchizedek received, as the priest of the Most High God, Jewish tradition, and that's all it is, assigns an identity to Melchizedek, a biblical identity that goes back 350 some odd years as a living being. You know who that person is? Shem. Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Shem lived 300, 400 years after the ark landed on the mountain, and his and descendants are said to have spread in this direction. And Melchizedek is supposedly Shem himself, who was alive during, according to the dates, according to the how who lived and how long they lived, the genealogy. Shem was alive not only in Abraham's entire lifetime, but Isaac's as well. So here you have somebody who grandfather knew Adam. It's great. He could have sat at the feet of his own grandfather and heard stories of Adam and Eve firsthand. I mean, we're not separated by great eons of time here. The oral traditions didn't have to pass from father to son for 100 generations to get down to Abraham and the Jews. Shem was alive, and his grandfather was alive when Adam was alive. So the stories could have been very original, firsthand, secondhand, maybe third hand, but no more, reaching this point. So this is the first mention of the early city of Jerusalem, going back 1330 BC to Abraham's time. City of David would have looked something like this. We're going to go to a scale model of Jerusalem. They've got one set up, and one of our day trips to the Israeli Museum, we'll be able to see the scale model of everything. I'm not sure. Salim means peace, city of peace. I don't know. It's a good question. That's your assignment for next class. That'll teach you to speak up. Okay, stone retaining wall. You see there it is. It's there today. This was one of the original things they found. Now, we'll go into the history of this in just a second, but we're not going to watch the video. This is the Kidron Valley. This is the Mount of Olives over here. This is the city of David, or Mount Zion. Zion is ringed with a crown of mountains. The psalmist talks about the crown around Mount Zion, and that's what these higher hilltops are. The Gihon Spring, as I've mentioned, is outside down in the Kidron Valley on the edge of the hill. And it is an artesian well. Now, there are different time frames of who owned the city, what they did to defend it. But when David captured the city, the Jebusites owned it, okay? They were one of the cultures that God said destroy utterly. Anybody remember how the Jebusites tricked Israel into letting them live? Remember Joshua, after they'd defeated Jericho, Ai, and they were wiping out everybody. These guys from Jerusalem traveled 25 miles, but they put on wore out clothes, wore out gear on their donkeys. Their bread was moldy and stale. They presented themselves as having come from a far distance. And they said, please don't kill us. Please let us dwell in the land and we will be your servants. Okay, that's exactly what they said. And Joshua, without inquiring of the Lord and the elders, said, sure, you're not likely to run into us anyway. You're from so far away. Well, it didn't take long, maybe a week, before they found out the deception. And oh, were they upset, but they had bound themselves in the name of the Lord to make a covenant with the Jebusites. So the Jebusites lived there by rights. Okay. Saul didn't like them being there, and David raided them from time to time. And he said, whoever will get me into this city and open its gates, he will have the position of the leader of my army. And who was that? Anybody remember who the commander of David's army was? Joab. Joab. And he did something strange. It says it in the word, but how did he get into the city? He went through the Canaanite tunnels that were drilled into the side of the hill for irrigation purposes. He made his way up this underground stream to a vertical shaft that was a defensive means of getting water out of this spring and defending it at a choke point right here. And evidently he shot him or came up in the middle of the night. There was nobody there. But however it was, he and his crew ascended this shaft, came out up above inside the walls of the city, opened the gates, and in came David with his army. And that's how Jerusalem was captured initially. And this Gihon Spring, Warren Shaft, we're going to start way up here, ground level, and we're going to wind our way underground down this shaft. And you're going to walk it, you're going to see it, you're going to be there. Right here in this area, there is a pool. And that pool is where Solomon was anointed king. Remember when his brother tried to take the kingdom from him by pronouncing himself? And Bathsheba went before David and said, I thought you said my son was going to be king, Solomon. And David said, take the royal donkey and all the trumpeters and blow the alarm that Solomon is king. And this is where they anointed. Down here in the center of this area. This is what it underlies the Gihon Spring. It's limestone. All of Jerusalem is limestone. Caves, like Kentucky, Mammoth Caves, if you've been up there, Carlsbad. There was a big cave reservoir, and they haven't found it, but it's somewhere under the city of Jerusalem. And when it fills up to H1 up there towards the top, it produces enough pressure to push this water up this spout, and then it starts siphoning down until it goes below the level of the siphon. And so it produces a rhythmic spring, one that flows kind of like Old Faithful, but it's flowing like that. They don't know where the origins of the water is. It's underground for miles, maybe 100 miles, all the way up in northern Galilee down to Jerusalem. But this was the main water source for the city. Canaanite Tunnel or the Scenic Walkway. Okay, there are three choices that you can have. If you don't want to get wet to about knee level, going through Hezekiah's tunnel, which if you are over 5'2", you're going to be like this most of the way for 530 meters, which is almost 2 football fields. And I got halfway through last time with the group, And I went, okay, I'm ready for this to be done. But I was only halfway through, and I was the only one that knew we were only halfway through. So it is a wonderful experience. Tim, you'll love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah. Here, look at how it curves around. Do you see the little snaky portion midway? That's when they heard the picks of the two teams that were trying to meet in the middle. If you're going two football fields apart from different ends of the city, how are you going to meet in the middle? And how are you going to get the water level of your tunnel to flow downhill properly? And that was the engineering feat of Hezekiah's tunnel, to bring the water inside the city walls. See down here at the bottom, those walls were already built. And so to bring the water inside rather than to let it flow out through the Canaanite holes like they were, uh, that was the challenge. Now, here's what it looks like on the inside, Hezekiah's tunnel. The ceiling height varies, but only towards the end of the tunnel. Because when they did meet in the middle, guess what? They found out that one tunnel was much higher than the other one. They couldn't get the water from the Gihon Spring to flow into the one that the floor was higher. So they had to lower the floor, and that made the ceiling much, much higher in that portion of the tunnel. So you do get some relief from this, but not until towards the end. This is what it looks like if you're going down into the Hezekiah's tunnel. That's about the average height. Now, the guy on the right, that's one end of the tunnel where the water is being dumped into the Siloam upper pool. And they're both towards the end near the exit. But you can see how tall the tunnel ceiling is. The width is the same, but the tunnel ceiling is much higher because they have to lower the floor to get the water running downhill. You see how far their pants are wet? You see the level of the water? It hadn't been that high in a while. It was ankle deep when we went through it 5 years ago. So it does vary, but it can't, the highest I've ever seen it is about that high. So if it troubles you to be in a tight space with water up to your waist, maybe the Hezekiah's tunnel is not for you. We will have two other options. One is a wonderful walking path through the archaeology parks of the Canaanite portion. And the other is those holes that came out to irrigate the Canaanite fields. I've never seen that. I mean, the exciting thing is that's only been in the last 5 years that they've discovered and opened those up for people to go through. Tall ceilings, narrow walls, but they've got a wooden plank floor to keep you above the water that's flowing down below. So you probably not even get your feet wet. And that's the one I'm going to go in this time. And everybody else that has a death wish can, or I mean, Dan is leading that one. Yeah. Yeah, sure. We, we met a group of Australians that were more than barefoot. They were stripped down to their underwear, and only Australians. Okay, Pool of Siloam is where the water dumps out. That's where it ends up. And only, I guess it's been 10 years, they were repairing a pipe, a water pipe, down here in an old section of the city in the valley, Kidron Valley. And it was the sewer company. And they were digging, excavating, and they found steps. And they couldn't believe it. The archaeologists came in and were ecstatic. This is the pool of Siloam. Now, where I've been prior to last trip. This was not excavated. And the pool of Siloam was something about the size of this room. Now, can you see 1,000,000 pilgrims on Passover in Jerusalem in Jesus's day, ritually cleansing themselves in a pool the size of this room before they ascended to the mountain of the Lord? Come and let us go until the mountain of the Lord. No, this is almost an acre in size, and it's a shallow pool that would service 1,000,000 pilgrims. You would go here, and remember the mikvah that we talked about last week? The mikvahs were for ritual cleansing. And before you presented yourself in the synagogue service or a temple service, before you presented yourself before the Lord, you ritually immersed yourself and removed the impurities, which we call baptism today. They called it that then. Same thing. When they baptized a convert to Judaism, it was in the mikvah. This is the largest mikvah in Israel. You see the wall there to the left. When we were there last time, that wall was as far as they could excavate. And the reason is it belonged to an Arab who did not like Israelis or Jews of any nature. And the Jewish City of Zion organization, who have millions of megabucks to develop the city of David from Jews all over the world, tried to buy that land, and he wouldn't sell to them in any way, form, or fashion. He died a year and a half ago, and his sons couldn't wait to sell to the city of David. And guess what? Not only is that entire bank not there, but an entire acre of land has been opened up. And they are putting in the pool of Siloam, bringing it down to those are original paving stones that you're seeing right there. And they're uncovering the rest of them as they slowly bring in the excavators, remove the Byzantine period of archaeology, then they remove the early Christian Byzantine, and then they go on down. They are restoring this fully. They're turning it into a Centennial Park like downtown Atlanta. It's going to be a beautiful landscaped planters all around. You can go online and see what they're planning on doing with it. But they want a mikvah for pilgrims coming to Jerusalem to immerse themselves before they present themselves before the third temple. Now, that's driving Israeli policy right now concerning the city of David and Jerusalem. Whether we agree with it or regardless of your eschatology, that's what's driving Jewish orthodoxy as we speak. And you're going to walk there because if they make this thing and it holds water, they've got to have a way to get people to the Temple Mount. Now you're way down in the bottom of the valley, way down in the tip. I think this shows it right here. You're way down at the bottom, and see where the flat hilltop. We're down here at the Pool of Siloam, and way up there is the Temple Mount. So how do you ascend from the Pool of Siloam, maintaining your ritual purity, all the way up the Cheesemakers Valley, or the Central Valley as it's called? They are building a cable car from Mount of Olives right here. First stop, Gihon Spring. Second stop, Pool of Siloam. And it's anticipating pilgrims coming from all over the world to Jerusalem. to begin down here and ascend to the Mount of the Lord, which is this flat top up here, Mount Moriah. All right, let's go back to the. See that area right here? That has only been opened up in the last 10 years. It's exciting for somebody like me. I've been over there 30 years ago to see the changes and the things being discovered and uncovered and made available to the public. We are going in here. This is a tunnel underground right now. It didn't used to be. It used to be paving stones, steps that go across the bottom of the road, and you ascend these steps all the way to the Temple Mount, all the way. And they're opening this up. There are shops, ancient shops that they're discovering with receipts from sales and whatnot. But this was the main thoroughfare for the people coming to Passover or any of the festivals on their way up to the temple itself. And you're going to walk there. That's a lot of steps. So this is the toughest day of the trip as far as steps go. You're starting with the city of David, descending all the way down, most of it underground, coming through the tunnel, transversing the entire valley links, coming out of the Pool of Siloam, and then circling around and returning to right here is where it comes out, right in this area right here. That's where this underground tunnel is. What you're looking at is all that's left of Herod's temple. Just a few stone courses right here at the bottom is all that remains of the Roman destruction of the Temple Mount. This is the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall. This was taken in the 1967 Six-Day War. They recaptured that for the first time in 2,000 years. Jews, you can look up the historical videos of it. They came and they weren't allowed, when the Jordanians controlled the territory, to approach the most sacred place in their religion. And they made it. They recaptured the city and they were wailing. They were weeping. You see that today. I mean, this is where they come to pray. They write their prayers on a piece of paper and stick it in the cracks of the rock. And so they come every evening, clean up the paper that has fallen to the ground, and then people come the next day and put in additional prayers. This area right here is the area for women. This is the area for men. And this area over here on the right is when they decided to be ecumenical and egalitarian in their approach. And they let men and women pray together, which was unheard of. And the day they opened it up, which was about 5 years ago, that day, one of the stones right there fell on the people that were praying down below on opening day. And of course, the rabbis over here, the Orthodox, said, "Told you so." Told you so. God is not pleased with this. You can see the stone and where it fell out of the thing, and we're there. Right here underneath this area is what you need to sign up for if you want to go in the tour underneath the foundations here to see the foundation stones of the Temple Mount. Now, one of the things that we talked about is that there is a line. I thought Jesus said that no stone would be left unturned. Didn't he prophesy that of the temple? That every stone would be turned over. Not one would be left standing upon another. That's true. of everything that can be seen. But when they started up here at the top of the wall, the Romans, throwing the rocks, tipping them over to the base and overturning every layer of rock they came to, all of a sudden the rocks at the floor level begin piling up. Now, how do you overturn a rock the size of an 18-wheeler? One rock the size of an 18-wheeler is right here in the wall down underneath this foundation of this building. You can't. I mean, the rubble had already reached up above it, and you couldn't excavate down to flip it over. So all of these bottom stones everywhere in Israel, everywhere we go, there will be a painted white squiggly line that shows where the rubble of the destroyed wall had accumulated, and everything below it is original. And so they excavate the rubble out and they put those stones back on top of the original wall, but they leave the white line to show where this section of the wall never got overturned. It never got destroyed. And you'll see that everywhere that we go. So realize that same thing happened here at the Wailing Wall. Yes, the Romans tore down everything on the Temple Mount, all of the structures, all of the buildings, all of the paving stones, and they threw them to the right-hand side down here in the valley. It's called the Ophel. And they've removed all of that stuff. They've rebuilt a bunch of it through the years. You can see these stones are different than the layer up top. One of the things that you're going to hear is an ashlar stone. If Herod built it, he had a decoration that he put around the edges of all of his Herodian stones. They were about a hand's breadth high, and they were a flat rabbet, we call it in carpentry, a rabbeted section that was just like taking a router and routing around the edge half an inch to quarter of an inch deep around every stone. So when they put one stone on another, you had two handbreadths of design there and meeting in the middle. Those are Herodian stones, and you find Herodian stones way up here in the upper top level where there's just regular stone down here in places, meaning that they used the rubble from the original Temple Mount wall to bring this up and reuse the stone. Common thing throughout Israel is reusing somebody else's bad news, their destruction layer. You'll see this ramp right here. This is the security ramp that we all have to go through in order to get to the Temple Mount itself. And this is the next day. We're going to end up that first day, the 26th, coming up the Pilgrim's Pathway, being dumped out over here on the right. And then we're going to go over here to Gethsemane in the Mount of Olives in the evening. It should be towards evening. And we will go over there and have a time of worship in the old olive groves overlooking the city of Jerusalem. Next day, we go to the Wailing Wall. We go through security and head up. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, in use today, a source of major contention and political discontent. When the Palestinians are in uproar, it's right outside the front of here. So be careful how you dress, how you look. This is called the Mosque of Omar, the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is where in Islamic faith, Muhammad ascended to heaven on his horse, whatever the name of the horse was. And it was from this location, which makes this the third holiest location in all of Islam. Okay, I don't know what number two is. Mecca is number one. Whatever number two is, this is number three. So it's no small focus of their faith, and they're defending it to the end. Where does it sit? I mean, it sits right where the Holy of Holies or the Solomon's temple sat. Now, this is an inscription that Herod put up on the wall as you're coming into the Temple Mount area. And here's what it says: no Gentile is to enter within the balustrade round the temple and enclosure. Whoever is caught will be responsible to himself for his death, which will ensue. Okay? You're a Gentile, you have no business being there. Paul brought in a Gentile, supposedly, when he was being fulfillment of a vow, and it created a riot immediately. You want to create a riot? Bring a Gentile into the temple grounds when the temple stood there. And that inscription is at Israeli Museum, which we can see. So when you see the Sorug inscription, it was on the wall where they found it the time before last when I was there. And I took Jim and Vicky and a couple others that wanted to see this inscription in place. I took them right to where it was. And we looked for 15 minutes and couldn't find the thing. And they had removed it completely, taken it 10 miles away to the Israeli Museum because people were defacing it and other things. But the Dome of the Rock has to come down if a third temple is to be built on the same location. Or the Jews can compromise and build their third temple to the side of the Dome of the Rock. There is enough room to biblically, in the measurements given, get everything in place. Here's what's inside of the Dome of the Rock: the threshing floor of Araunah. We just mentioned the story, right? David, the angel of death, the pestilence that was sweeping through Jerusalem. This is the exact place where it was stopped. It's the pinnacle of Mount Moriah. It's the highest elevation of Mount Moriah, and it's where they thresh the wheat, right here. There are a few things that we can be certain of when we travel around Israel, matching them to a biblical time or place. This is one of them. And what you're seeing is that the Islamic religion has completely gotten hold of control of this site. But this was where the temple was built. Now we're going to be taking up no. Oh, absolutely. There have been, in my lifetime, since I was 5, I've been around people that were thinking this was going to be blown up, that a bomb was going to destroy it. I mean, we've been hearing that for generations, for, whatnot. And there have been bombing attempts by Jews to bring down this so that the third temple could be rebuilt. So,
you go to the top, you'll see armed guards, and you'll see people controlling people's behavior and appearance and everything else. If you see it very much as a place of a holy place, and Gentiles behaving themselves.
The entire Temple Mount has been given to Jordan to maintain. So the police that you see on the Temple Mount are Jordanian. They're not Palestinian. Separate the Jordanian Arabs who've been there for thousands of years from the Palestinians, who are made up of a ragtag group of people from all different backgrounds and so forth, that occupied the land as laborers and whatnot to the more upscale Arab neighbors. Jordanians are more neutral. They have maintained a good neutrality for them, because not all Jordanians are Muslim. Some of them are Christian. Pool of Bethesda, where Jesus healed the man who had no one to lower him down into the water. That thing is tripled in size, excavation-wise, since I was first there. The Antonia Fortress, where Jesus was taken before Pilate and scourged, and they gambled over his clothes at the cross, but they arrayed him in a purple robe here. You can go down in and see where the pavement stone is, where verdict was pronounced on Jesus by Pilate. And then he was brought out. Now look how it is. That's the Temple Mount there. See the colonnade that goes completely around the temple? The temple's out here, right here. This colonnade is the Temple Mount, and there were staircases that came from the Antonia Fortress, Mark Antony, down to the Temple Mount. So if a riot ensued on the Temple Mount, the Roman cohort, 200, 250 soldiers, could flood the area and maintain control. So Pilate, when he came to Jerusalem from Caesarea Maritima, would come here. This was the Roman fortress. And that's where Jesus was scourged, where he was taken. We're going down into the basement underneath the Catholic churches that are there and see it. When he brought Jesus out, anybody have Latin? Take Latin. Ecce homo. I'm not versed in Latin, so that's a poor pronunciation, I'm sure. But it means behold the man. Remember in Scripture when Jesus was brought out before the people and Pilate said, I've washed my hands, behold the man. And this is called, right here, the beginning of the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of Suffering. And that is the Ecce Homo Arch. This is where the stairs came down from the Antonia Fortress. And that's the beginning point of the Way of the Cross, where you can travel down the same suggested pathway, which has been identified by Roman Catholics as the 7 stations of the cross, or 9, I forget which. Excuse me. All the way to the place of the skull. This is called Golgotha, and there are 2 locations suggested for it. One of them is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is, that the gate that Jesus was crucified right at, he was crucified at one of the gates of the city, the northern, or the one of the northern gates. We don't know which for certain, which is why there's uncertainty as to where the tomb for Jesus is. But what we do know is that it was a high trafficked area. It was right outside one of the main gates. And when there was a description given, it was just simply Golgotha, the place of the skull. I have heard sermons since I was a little kid. I take it for what it's worth, but it stuck with me all my life and through Bible college, that the place of the skull was where David brought Goliath's head as a trophy when he came up from the battle, and Saul posted it somewhere outside the gate, and it became known as the place of the skull. But this is what it looked like. Now, did it look like this in the time of Christ? We don't know. But people say that it's because it looks like this, which now looks like this as the years pass by. It doesn't look as much like a skull until you get to today, and here it is right here, nose, eye sockets, hardly anything left. That saying that Jesus was crucified on this escarpment up above. But look what's down below. This is the city bus station. for the Arab community, and it stinks to high heavens. Garbage, diesel fuel, and it's right here inside of this gated area is the most pristine, beautiful place in all of Jerusalem, in my opinion. And it is the garden. I mean, you see a skull there today. That's a more recent picture. It's getting harder and harder to make out. Was Jesus and the two thieves crucified on the hilltop? Probably not. You see what's that right there? What did it say? If you were way up there, I mean, way down here, even back at the roadway where the roadway passed, could you read that? Would it have any impact? Not likely. Conjecture would say that the crosses were down right on the edge of the road. The Romans wanted to push your nose, the Jewish nose, in the fact that you will disobey us. This is what you're going to get. And so anybody passing by within a short distance could read the sign above on the torture stake, as it was called in the Greek. This is what's behind that fence. The fence is to the right. This is called the Garden Tomb. You've got two choices for the burial place of Christ. One is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which looks nothing like anything like this. Or there's this. This is controlled and was purchased by evangelicals back in the early 1900s as an alternative to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Was there a highway running right by this? Yes, there was. Is that a Jewish tomb? Identical to all the other main Jewish tombs that they found in the area. Was that Jesus's tomb? They say, the evangelicals, probably not. Probably not. There is no claim whatsoever that this was Christ's tomb. It is a claim that this is what Christ's tomb looks like. This is a Jewish tomb from the first century. Yeah, it's got a good roomful. These were death processors, is what they were. In a Jewish burial, it was two parts. First part, you took the body in, you laid it on a slab, and here is the platform that you laid it on, bound it, perfumed it, did the various things, and then you rolled the stone over the opening for 1 year to allow decomposition to do its work and to leave nothing but bones. And then they would take a stone ossuary and they would put the white bleached bones into the box, and it would have your name on it and something else maybe. And they'd either take the box and put it in the corner, or they'd take it to a family crypt somewhere where there were boxes stacked up of the various dearly departed. So this hole that you see right here, once the stone is rolled over, does the soul go? Well, it escapes through that hole. That was the Jewish view of death. Sheol, death, Abaddon. There was a place for the dead, and psalmists say, no one praises you from Sheol. Christians have a different view. Righteous Jews have a different view, that the soul would be in the presence of the bosom of Abraham immediately, in the presence of God. So this hole is an identifier of a Jewish tomb because it is able to identify all of, you see these holes up here, here, dig into the soft limestone, carve out a room, have a platform in it, lay the body on the platform, come back a year later, and what you do with the bones. He is risen. He is not there. And what I would suggest is that you take the opportunity when we're there. We're going to have communion service. Take the opportunity and visualize, because I can guarantee you're within 1/4 of a mile of where the burial and resurrection took place. We may not see the actual one, but that's as close as you're going to get. And you can certainly realize and peg the feeling that Mary Magdalene had when she came and she saw the stone rolled away. Where have you put my Lord? He is risen. He is not here. And wonderful, wonderful way to cement that in your memory by attending this particular location. All right, we're 8 minutes over. We started 8 minutes late. So any questions on anything? Uh-huh. It's not the mileage. The mileage is short. It's the steps, because you're going downhill, which is canyon climbing. You're using a set of muscles you don't normally use. Then you go up the steps, coming back up. 2 miles.
I was thinking like 5 miles, walk in a day.
I think it was 4 miles, the most. It's optional. You do not have to do that. You want to come hang out with me near the bus, that's perfectly okay. Rather than going, well, there's the outside path. Yeah.
I was looking, trying to find that there's a place where those who sign up for a free time, and it's where on like this.
It's not on our website. If you just simply, I'll find a link and send it out. That's the simplest thing to do. Yeah. I tried to go on the spur on our free day last time. They were booked. I mean, it's booked solid. Hopefully you'll have a chance to see that, but there's a tunnel down under there, a doorway that is supposedly where the Holy of Holies was from approach from underneath. And boy, that almost started World War III when the Jewish archaeologists started heading towards the Holy of Holies underground to where the Mosque of Omar was. They heard the noise underground of the picks and the shovels, and riots took place immediately. They shut it down, but you can see the door where that happened. Kind of, it's kind of like being in Europe and saying, don't go to Cumming because America is politically divided. No, nowhere where we're going. I mean, Tel Aviv is where the hot spot is. And Tel Aviv is where all the riots and protests, and that's where the people live. We're going to land there and get out of Dodge immediately. We won't be there more than an hour. And it's Jewish on Jewish, which is better than Palestinian. No, Knesset's on the outskirts of Jerusalem. But I don't, there were some protests like on the Supreme Court. That's pretty common, but nobody lives there. The suburbs are all outside in Tel Aviv. You can ask Brad. I mean, every time I ask him, it's the people are just coming back from the trip, didn't see anything. Now, the problem we're going to have is going into Palestinian territory, West Bank. That's Woman at the Well, Mount Gerizim. That's coming up next week as our final, not next week, let me get this right. The August the 13th is our last class. And we're going to be going over the whole, going into the West Bank, Bethlehem, Herodium, Shiloh, a lot of good places, some of which we didn't get to go to last time. So they'll be fresh for Dan. But well worth going. So, all right. That should do it.